Great. So I'd now like to pass it on to Maxine Bruce of the Lil'wat Nation, who will be welcoming us tonight.
Thank you. Nkwúkwma, Shamachkwachich, Maxine Bruce, Lil'wat Shladmukkan, Amashwat Takum. It's good to see everyone here. I just wanted to take some time to open up our event in the most positive way and share some words with our creator. If you guys could all please bear with me, ask you to, I don't want to impose my beliefs on you about prayer, but I want to share some words with our creator. O kucha kukpi, kukstum kauti tmilhuat koa, muta I takmawat aquanum, kukstum kauti amashkate. Kukstum kau takam I nchmalchkasha muta I takam I uchomiu. Amatzilhash. I just said thank you to our creator. I thank the creator for the land, for the water. I thank the creator for the food that we eat. I thank the creator for the beautiful day. I thank the creator for our children. I also thank the creator for all the human beings. Kukstum katlap nishti. Thanks, everyone. Just want to share with you that I'm very pleased to be working with our team, and that I'd like to acknowledge that we gathered today virtually on the traditional territory of the Lil'wat people. It's awesome to be here to talk with you. Kuksum Katla. Just for your information, the Lil'wat Nation traditional territory encompasses close to 800,000 hectares of land, including Nkwúkwma. The traditional use has been confirmed by recent archaeological investigations in the area. There are 10 separate areas to look at, including a rock shelter, pictographs. Those were identified. The discoveries confirmed that Nkwúkwma was a strategic location for Lil'wat, being above the floodplain and all that. Also has a beautiful view. The Nkwúkwma neighborhood has and will integrate Lil'wat land use principles, design and development, and includes a cultural interpretive plan prepared by the Lil'wat Nation that shares the nation's culture, heritage, and language throughout the project. That's really very dear to me. An archaeological impact assessment will be required to further confirm the significance and protection of important findings. I just felt that we needed to share that with everyone, and gave some photos to you on this slide, just showing the generations and the things that we do. Kukstum Katlap.
Thanks, Maxine. So my name is Carrie Mahaffey, and I am the CAO for the Lil'wat Nation. I've been in the role for about 2 years, but I've worked for the nation since 2007 in a variety of capacities. Most recently as CEO of the Lil'wat Business Group, which is the nation's arm's length group of companies with a mandate to generate economic benefits, including profits, employment opportunities, and capacity building opportunities for nation members. So the nation, through one of its companies, Lil'wat Capital Assets, is very proud to be an equal partner in the development of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood. This is the third time the nation's actually considered this project. The first was in 2006, the second in 2010, and in 2016. We did make a decision to pursue the project earnestly. So the initial phase of development will require significant investment into the area and Pemberton community. The initial estimated initial investment for phase one is approximately $27.5 million. I think more importantly for the nation itself, this is a long-term 20 to 40-year project that provides opportunity for significant and stable economic benefit for the nation. Profits from the Lil'wat Business Group are reinvested into community projects, including language and culture, community buildings, housing, and agriculture, as well as invested in other business opportunities. And the project, through community entity contributions, will invest in community priorities dictated by the Village of Pemberton.
Thanks, Carrie. So I'd just like to kind of get some housekeeping out of the way before we jump into our presentation. So I'll just touch on kind of the Zoom format as well as the opportunities to comment on this presentation. So this evening with the open house number 2, which is a virtual presentation, I'm just reviewing the Zoom format with you now. We'll then be running through some background information on the project before then reviewing the Nkwúkwma development application and the design, followed then by 3D model videos to be able to understand the land in a 3D format, all of which is then followed by a Q&A period. So that allows you to ask questions of the project team. We have a full roster of our technical consultants on the project, so they're happy to answer questions and be able to do that with you today. And in addition to that, you'll be able to provide feedback on the project website, which is nkwúkwmapemberton.com, and there's opportunities to comment there as well. So quickly, in terms of the Zoom format and kind of how to participate tonight, you've all joined this meeting. And as part of the Q&A portion, unless you are prompted to speak after raising your hand, all attendees' microphones and cameras will be disabled. If you can't hear, make sure that your audio is turned on and the volume's up. You may need to check your Zoom settings to ensure that the audio is connected properly. This is an important one, that thoughtful questions are welcome, and please lead with kindness and curiosity. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation within the kind of designated Q&A portion. You can ask questions in one of 2 ways. The first is using the Q&A button, which is down on the bottom panel of your screen. If you hover your cursor, you'll be able to click the Q&A button and type a question in there. We'll then direct that question to the relevant participant to answer that question. You can also raise your hand and you would then be able to answer a question live. So you could come up on the screen and ask a question. We're going to alternate between written questions and live questions, given there's an equal number of them, but we'll kind of see how that progresses. And if we aren't able to get to all the questions tonight, you can contact us and get further information, but specifically contact us at info@nkwúkwmapemberton.com. So community feedback. So starting tonight, you can provide feedback on this presentation a couple different ways. You can visit the website nkwúkwmapemberton.com, and you'll be able to complete a survey on the public engagement page. Or in addition to that, you can also send an email to info@nkwúkwmapemberton.com. All the comments will be documented as part of the public engagement summary for the Nkwúkwma Benchlands development application. And again, after December 8th, you can send an email to info@nkwúkwma or be in touch through the Stay Informed feature on the nkwúkwmapemberton.com website. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Carolyn Lamont.
Thanks, Teo. My name is Carolyn Lamont, and I am the Land Development Manager for the Skinkinum development. I have been worked in the Sea to Sky region for about, scary enough, 30-something years, so doing land planning and development. What I'm going to do is provide a brief development to the development application, picking up from where the March 2020 public open house finished. Basically looking at the status of the lands, which looked at the status of the lands and the opportunity for this development. This presentation, however, will focus us on the where, why, what of the application. If you want to review what happened in March 2020, that is available on the public engagement page of the website. Teo, next slide. The applicant, and I know, oh, we missed a slide there, did we? Oh, there we go. Sorry, the applicant, the who is the applicant and developer is Skinkinem Development. This partnership is between Lillooet Capital Assets LP and Pemberton Benchlands Development Corp. They've previously partnered on Red Sky and Baxter Creek in Whistler, as well as recently are working on the new Function gas station in Whistler. Many have asked about Pemberton Development Corp. Its projects include Amplepath, Riverstones, and Sirocco and Squamish, and recently have a rezoning in with the Nita Lake employee and Market Townhomes in Whistler. Next slide. The WHO includes a multidisciplinary team of professionals who have been working for over 2 years on understanding the land and planning the new development. All of those in the box outlined in dotted line are here today to answer any of your questions. If you do have questions for other consultants in the lower line, we'd be happy to collect those through the website and get you an answer. Next slide. The land transfer and acquisition process. At the March 2020 public meeting, there was much dialogue about the acquisition of the provincially managed lands. First, it's important to know that Lillooet Nation has had an accommodation interest in the Benchlands Phase 1 since 2005. As well, the acquisition of the lands was consistent with the Village of Pemberton's shared protocol agreement and OCP policies on collaboration and reconciliation. An application was made to the province in 2017 with an offer of purchase in 2019. The lands transferred to the Lillooet Capital Assets and then the partnership in September 2021. A condition of the purchase was the cleanup of the contamination on 2 parcels, and we'll talk about that a bit later, formerly known as the gun and rifle ranges. As well, and this is important for trail user groups, as well as others, there are rights of ways were also secured at the time of transfer for existing utilities, as well as blanket right of ways, as well as ensuring ongoing public access of existing trails. Next slide. Land transfer reconciliation. Again, in response to the why and how come of this land transfer, it's important to know that the nation completed all land transfer application in accordance with all provincial requirements, undertaking the same due diligence and technical studies as any other applicant in the province. Pemberton Benchlands Development has chosen to align itself with Section 92 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission related to corporate principles, consultation, equitable opportunities, and long-term economic development with the nation. The transfer of land was also consistent with UNDRIP as it put words into action on Lillooet's unceded traditional territory. Next slide. The development application or the subject lands. In the March 2020, we actually talked about all the lands, and actually all the background research has been done on the parcels that are outlined in light blue, red with the orange dots, and the gray. What I want to do is just talk about this, what lands are part of the current application. For context, if you look below, you'll see Eagle Ridge or Eagle Drive that comes up from Pemberton Meadows Road. That is the first phase of the Benchlands, which has been built out over the last 10 years. The darker gray-blue color is the subject lands of this development application. The lands above that, outlined in red, that look to have Winnie the Pooh on them, is the contaminated sites, and the orange delineates at this time what we know of the contamination from the ranges. And finally, the outline in blue is the lands which were part of the transfer but are within the SLRD. Of note is the contaminated parcel cannot be subject to a development application until there is an approved remediation plan through the province, and that's restricted on title. As well, District Lot 8820, or the one in the SLRD, will need a boundary extension. So as I mentioned, right now, this is for a 267 unit development, but it does have a potential. We didn't want to hide it, but those are also part of the land acquisition and we're part of the neighborhood concept plan. Next slide. The next is the how of the process in achieving the approval of the development proposal. The development application asks for amendment to the OCP and the zoning bylaw to better reflect the community's needs. As you can see from the process outlined, there are many steps in the process that we need to achieve before construction can even begin, including the official community plan or OCP amendment, the zoning bylaw amendment, a development permit, subdivision, as well as a building permit. Next slide. Community feedback. It is important to talk about some of the input that was valuable as part of the March 2020 open house, which has since informed the development application. In particular, there was a survey that people filled out online, which identified top amenities and benefits that the project may bring. That was a variety of housing types, trail networks, new parks, and a walkable neighborhood. As well, it's important to include affordable housing, access to nature, sustainable and environmentally friendly design, lit 4-season multi-use trails to the site and through the site, and transit amenities. I should say that I'm not going to read every slide, but we have made them quite text heavy so that when people go back on the website, they have some additional information if they choose. Okay, next slide. As well, here are the themes that we heard at the open house. Particularly, they wanted the site plan, the community wanted the site plan to recognize the site constraints and incorporate small town sensitivities and design, retain trees, have flexible unit designs. Community amenities should include indoor and outdoor, or indoor and covered space, and the cleanup of the contamination. Parks and trails should be enhanced, preserved, and expanded with trailhead improvements. Traffic needs to consider construction traffic, Eagle Drive improvements, off-site traffic impacts in downtown, and making phase 1 Benchlands safer for pedestrians. Site servicing needs to deal with stormwater flows, as well as off-site improvements to water and sanitary. Next slide. There has been some discussion that this plan is not consistent with the OCP, and I just wanted to touch on why it is requiring an amendment. As noted, these lands that were part of the purchase had about 503 units allocated, but most of those were for single family use. And following our consultation with both the village and their housing policies, as well as the community, there was a desire to have a mix of residential land uses and densities to do the spectrum of housing needs within the community. So that's, as you can see, this is the current land use map for the project, and everything but the red is pretty much single family of different sizes. The other is to expand the natural areas and parks and open space. Since the 2007 plan was adopted, more constraint mapping was done through our process, including the archaeological sites, and also some of the development areas were probably were not as appropriate for development, considering steep slopes and riparian areas. The last is on that land use, the big blue dot is the school site. And since the school board has indicated that they do not need this site any longer, as they have 2 other sites within the valley. Okay, next slide. And the zoning, likewise, this is the zoning right now. It is RS1. We would, if it was consistent with the neighborhood concept plan could proceed. But again, we want to make sure that it isn't just a single family subdivision, that it meets the needs of the greater community with a range of housing types and densities. I think it's also really important to know that if you're looking for community amenities through new development, what triggers that is rezoning. So this also to have that rezoning in place so that the developer can contribute to the community amenities of the community. I would note that the CD zoning that's proposed will have flexible commercial community use spaces, as well as allow some flexibility over time in the land uses. So it's a much better tool than the really just far-reaching R1 zoning. I will now hand off to Paul Fensky of Acoustics, who will present the development plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carolyn, Maxine, Carrie, for the presentation to date. We're very pleased to be here with you tonight. Again, my name is Paul Fensky. I'm a principal with Acoustics, and we were involved, in fact, led the planning and design with the Village of Pemberton for the NCP back in 2005, 2007. And so we're very pleased to be with you this evening, participating in the updating of the plan and the advancing of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood. The last time that we had a chance to be together was at the very beginning of the pandemic, March 11th, 2020. And that was the evening where we held an open house in the community center, and we had a chance to meet and present our understandings of the land, as well as some fly-through videos in order to help translate that 2D understanding into a 3-dimensional understanding based on the latest 1 meter LiDAR contours and the various constraints that we understood at that time. In the intervening year and a half, there's been a world pandemic, but more specifically in terms of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood, there have been continued technical reviews, both planning and engineer reviews that have been undertaken on site, as well as initial conversations with both the Village of Pemberton and the provincial government. And in fact, it was in September of this year that there was a completion of the provincial land sale and transfer to the Lillooet that allowed us now to move forward where we are this evening in December with our open house number 2, albeit in a virtual format, as part of the Village of Pemberton OCP amendment and rezoning process. The hope in the year ahead is that as we continue to move through, gain feedback, refine the understandings and the plan, that the village will then also be able to move forward with the development process that Carolyn was able to outline for us and the requisite amendment to the official community plan and the associated zoning bylaw. Next slide. I think, as we mentioned the last time we were together, it's important that we pause and we ask ourselves, I think, some of the harder questions that often development doesn't take time to pose and listen and get feedback on. And I think that those questions really begin with, well, how do we want to grow? And I think recent weather and flooding throughout BC, as well as changing values in the community as we begin to recognize more and more our impact on natural systems and their abilities to support us. We recognize that we live in changing times and that we really need to do things differently. And that includes the way that we plan and develop our communities. And I think the opportunity both at the neighborhood plan scale, but also at the Nkwúkwma neighborhood scale, is that it allows us to acknowledge the way things are today, document those things, but then start imagining how they could be better. And that's really the necessary process, not only for ourselves as planners and designers and the village as administrators, but as a community, to begin to look at, well, how do we move practically towards sustainability? And in order to engage sustainability and all that that means, it really means, I think, at the core of it, working with nature in order to live more lightly on the land and in a way that allows us to live more locally as a community. And if we're able to do that, even make a start at that within the Nkwúkwma neighborhood, then really we'll be starting to move the way we live towards, I think, what might be viewed as the best of valley living. Why here? Why the Benchlands? Well, the Benchlands aren't new. They've been on the books as a designated development area for the village of Pemberton for years and years. They've often been within and held by the province, now transferred to the Lillooet, but they represent the largest and therefore the most significant parcel of designated growth area that sits above the floodplain and not within conflicts with the agricultural land reserve. The other benefit, I think, to these lands is that while they are on a hillside, they are proximate to the village center. And in fact, so proximate that we can even think of them in terms of walkability and creating a more centrally located community that can partake in village life on a daily basis and provide that very much needed, more diverse housing for everyone in the community, not simply for the larger homes on large single family lots. Why now? Well, I think like all good planning, it tries to have a long horizon line and that need for planning ahead. And the Benchlands and the Nkwúkwma neighborhood by extension are really about managing development in a way that benefits the community overall. And so part of that means directing development in order to fulfill existing as well as projected demands within the village over the next 5, 10, 20 years, 30 years, etc. And of course, now with the Lillooet Nation being involved, there's a very strong overriding direction to make sure that whatever we're doing within the Nkwúkwma neighborhood is making a long-term commitment and investment within the community of Pemberton. Next slide. Many will recall this slide, which is a summary of the understood constraints as well as trails that exist within the Benchlands NCP, with the addition of the red lines represented as trails. The lands, of course, reflect a complex mountainous topography featuring exposed granite rock outcrops as well as second growth forest covers. And in combining the various biophysical and technical inventories and analysis, environmental, geotechnical, archaeological, as well as contaminated sites and existing recreational facilities, we're able to, with this plan, create a single, more comprehensive constraints understanding through which then to begin to direct growth and preserve those special areas. The lands, of course, have long been used and are traversed today, not only by recreation trails, but by a series of utility corridors, particularly in the Northwest. And they contain, of course, a variety of access points from Eagle Ridge Drive into the backcountry. Now, on this plan, for the purposes of our work, steep and extreme slopes, those lands that are typically 30% or greater, where development is not encouraged or permitted, are coded in that dark brown or taupe color. In addition, as part of the geotechnical work done by Contour, there is areas of dark gray on the far western edge, as well as the eastern edge, associated with the steep slopes, which are those geotechnically hazard areas that have been identified. In addition, as mentioned by Carolyn, the orange area in the southwest, or in the upper left-hand corner of the slide, is the extents of the known contamination from the historic gun and rifle ranges on the site. And of course, as mentioned by Maxine, there have been archaeological areas of interest now identified on the lands, identified in the brighter, lighter orange, with future development requiring an archaeological impact assessment, or AIA, in conjunction with the nation in order to move forward. The lands, of course, as mentioned before, rise well above the valley floor and feature a variety of solar orientations and big valley views. And in understanding where trails move in relation to the steep slopes, the riparian systems that move through and help drain the site, as well as the areas of contamination, ecological and cultural interest, this plan provides an opportunity for us to have a solid foundation of information as we started to explore how the Nkwúkwma neighborhood could fit within these lands and form a part of the larger, more complete Pemberton community. Next slide. So working with all of the opportunities and constraints identified within this 77 acres of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood lands, the lands have been categorized now into their level of constraint. The most constrained lands, those coded as green, represent steep slopes, areas of riparian and waterways, areas with high environmental sensitivity, and they cover approximately 35 acres or 45% of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood lands. Medium constrained lands represent moderate slopes, low as well as medium ESAs. Geotechnical and archaeological areas have been identified, as well as those lands that are difficult for accessing with streets or municipal services. And they cover approximately 10% of the site, or 7.5 acres. The remaining lands are coded in that light cream color, noted in the legend as potential development areas, and they have low constraints. They're generally gentle to moderate slopes, have no or low ESAs. They include areas like utility corridors. And they also provide lands that are contiguous, larger areas that we can have street access, municipal services run. And they, interestingly enough, also represent about 35 acres or 45% of the site. In having this cream and green, this non-development area and potential development area mapping, as well as the hatched lines of the moderately constrained lands, it allows us to begin to form a bit of a green framework, if you will, that allows us to begin to direct development towards those areas of development potential and away from those areas of habitat sensitivity, as well as steep slopes, archaeological interest, et cetera. And in doing so, begin to form a bit of a legacy understanding for the entire lands. Next slide. As we transition from that 2D plan with all of its somewhat abstract forms, and we lay that onto the three-dimensional model of the site, we can better understand where those areas of development potential are, as well as where those areas of non-development potential are. And so you'll see moving up from Eagle Drive, that area where the two water reservoirs located as the white dots on the plan sit, that really is sitting in the middle of what is the largest potential development area with the lowest constraints. Likewise, sitting above a band of green forest represented by the steep slopes is where the future, or where the historic gun range and rifle club was, noted as a terrace. And again, gentle lands that sit way up top. In contrast to, we can see the green lands, especially the point that rises above Pemberton Meadows Road at the entrance to Eagle Ridge Drive, is part of that incredibly steep slope area with not only archaeological interests and habitat values, but also geotechnical constraints on that. The green framework then begins to direct the planning as mentioned and starts conserving what matters in the Nkwúkwma neighborhood. Next slide. So as we turn our attention from the larger Benchlands, OCP lands, and their constraints, and we begin to focus down on the Nkwúkwma development application that was submitted and is currently with the Village of Pemberton, we then wanted to make sure that we were satisfying all of the requirements as listed by the village. Next slide. And so that involved then having Cascade Environmental Resource Group do the initial environmental review and riparian assessment. And that work served to confirm our understanding of the site. And it also confirmed the suitability of the neighborhood plan. Now, before work goes ahead on the site, there are still some required surveys that will be done, including rare and endangered plants, wildlife, to confirm the presence, such as the little brown myotis roosting sites, a type of local bat, brown bat, as well as the potential for sharp-tailed snake, specifically denning sites. There'll be a screech owl nest survey done, as well as songbird nesting windows, which will limit the time of potential clearing of the land at the time of development permitting. In addition, there'll be a series of vegetation requirements that Cascade identified, really stressing the retention of vegetation that's currently on the site to facilitate wildlife movement, to retain the existing breeding and foraging areas, as well as specifically to look for opportunities to avoid impacts on the local bear population. And in planting new landscape, whether it be street trees or private landscapes in yards, to stress and require the use of native tree and shrub species that not only do not attract bears, but can also promote pollinators, birds, bees, butterflies, etc., as part of a larger habitat enhancement strategy. And of course, all of the construction requirements were reminded within Cascade's report that they need to follow BC's development with care guidelines. Specifically is a way of trying to minimize erosion and sedimentation during development. Next slide. In addition to the environmental work that was done by Cascade, Contour geotechnical consultants also provided a geotechnical assessment that characterized those observed naturally occurring areas of hazard, noted on the plan in the darkest gray areas, and areas that we needed to stay away from in terms of potential guiding future development and potential neighborhood uses, as well as identifying areas where mitigation could occur to lessen those hazards. In addition to that geotechnical assessment, there was also a preliminary rock fall mitigation assessment that was done specifically for Eagle Ridge Drive, and that work was completed by X Services Incorporated. And of course, moving forward in conjunction with the village, the Nkwúkwma neighborhood will follow all of the mitigation requirements, specifically for rockfall hazard areas, both existing and future concerns. Next slide. So with that series of technical studies done, not only for the Benchlands, but also more specifically for the Nkwúkwma neighborhood, that 77 acres of the lower portion of the Benchlands that sit adjacent and slightly above phase 1 of the Benchlands as an extension of Eagles Ridge Drive, we then come to the neighborhood concept. This is a draft concept, but it's a concept that we've been able to engage those constraints, as noted, as well as engage that community feedback that Carolyn was able to walk us through the highlights of. And in doing so, then come up with an approach that was very much centered in supporting the community. And specifically, looking at opportunities to work with the land, and in working with the land, ensure that we're minimizing intrusion and land regrading, that we apply hillside design strategies where we're stepping building foundations with walkout basements, we're minimizing retaining walls, we're applying hillside street standards, which allow us to have a narrower platform while still providing for the safe movement of people, bicycles as cars in a shared platform. And then we're also celebrating the land. And that also means ensuring the privacy of our neighbors, those people who live within Benchlands phase 1. The plan also is centered on delivering a diversity of homes. And that's part of the need for the OCP update and the rezoning, is to ensure that we can do more than simply large RS1 single-family homes. Part of the design also focused on how do we start designing a connected community, and that means connected streets and prioritizing the pedestrian. And having places to live and circulate and be in community, we also wanted to ensure that the neighborhood had generous parks, as well as some new built amenities. Next slide. So as we zoom in to that area, the 77 acres, the subject of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood development application, we see then the extension of Eagle Ridge Drive as it circulates first to the south and then to the west as it climbs up the hill, moving in behind the current water reservoirs and arriving at a central terraced platform before then moving further up and around the central rocky knoll towards phase 3, or those future development lands currently under remediation for their contamination. Within this plan, you see different colors of buildings, which represent different sizes of both single family detached, as well as duplex, townhomes, and a single apartment building located in the center of the plan. The plan is structured to provide a pedestrian orientation with sidewalks on local streets, as well as the extension of Eagle Ridge Drive, and the provision of both public neighborhood parks, as you can see noted with the label park, both a lower park as well as an upper park, with opportunities for not only grass gathering areas, whether for toboggan hills and parties, but also playgrounds, covered pavilions, and even the incorporation of adventure play from pump tracks to rock climbing opportunities. In addition to the public neighborhood parks, there are also a series of strata owned and operated townhouse parks, which will also provide further green space, further gathering areas, and further areas to play within this neighborhood. Next slide. As mentioned already, the idea of the housing mix presented is that to recognize the community need for both attainable, family-friendly housing, as well as downsizing and aging in place opportunities. And so in total, the plan provides 85% of all future homes as ground-oriented homes, either as townhomes, duplexes, and small single family, as well as some medium and large homes, with a total of 267 homes within this portion of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood. And of course, the character of the homes designed and being pursued is one that celebrates Pemberton's character as a mountain community, as well as one of a small town charm in terms of its materials. And that, of course, will be regulated through the use of site-specific design guidelines that will be registered on the property itself. Part of the need for rezoning, as mentioned, is the shifting down of the size of homes and associated lots. We realize that in order to have a community neighborhood that has all of these features and amenities, we can also live in a way that allows us to have not only large homes, but also small single family, duplex, townhome, and even apartment, all within the same neighborhood. Really an opportunity to provide a home for everyone. Next slide. In addition to homes and new amenities, is an opportunity to design the street network as a place of public realm that's really intended to be a shared space. And so you can see the different colors of roads, with the extension of Eagle Ridge Drive in the darkest orange as a designated collector loop, moving up and around through the different terraces of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood. Eventually, as noted in the dashed arrows, it will form a collecting loop that will feed back on itself and down the hill. In addition to the collecting loop and the darkest orange, we have the lighter orange of local streets, with both a lower loop around the neighborhood park, as well as an upper loop with dramatic views over the valley. In addition to those two public standards of roads, there are also opportunities for strata drives, noted in yellow, as well as shared driveways, noted in blue. As we go to the next slide, Given our experience in working in mountain communities from Whistler to the Okanagan, we have experience in designing new road cross sections for these new neighborhoods. And this is what we're proposing within the Nkwúkwma neighborhood, is to have a new street network that's really intended to be shared by all. And in doing so, there's an opportunity with the extension of Eagle Ridge Drive to establish a gateway experience as we continue to circulate up into the Benchlands and design a neighborhood that's connected. Of course, providing 2 travel lanes as noted, opportunities for parking, as well as opportunities for a separated shared pedestrian and cycling pathway, complete with street trees and lighting standards that focus the light down in order to preserve the rural night sky. This multimodal connection, or this shared pathway for pedestrians and cyclists, will connect Nkwúkwma neighborhood all the way down into the village itself. And in doing so, I think create a very distinct street character and neighborhood experience. Next slide. That approach to a hillside design standard that limits and restricts the environmental, physical impact of new roads in a community has also been extended to the way that we design the local street that accesses individual homes, whether they be single family, townhomes, or the apartment building. And in doing so, we see opportunities still for 2 lanes of traffic, parking on one side, and still incorporating opportunities for pedestrian walkway, as well as planted boulevards with street trees and downcast lighting. Next slide. Moving on to parks and trails, really the cornerstone opportunity presented by the land itself. We wanted to make sure that the land had a sense of generous parks. And in fact, almost 50% of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood lands are dedicated as public park and natural area, ensuring there's lots of room to roam, as it were. And within that park system, prioritizing the pedestrian, both within the multi-use pathway along the extended Eagle Ridge Drive, as well as sidewalks on local streets, and the strata pathways, both within parks and townhomes, linking the neighborhood together, and providing in total just over 3 kilometers of new pedestrian connections. Of course, in complement to the existing trails, as well as realigned trails noted in the darker red color. Part of the parks obviously is also an opportunity to celebrate the views and the majesty of the landscape. And so you'll note the park lookouts, both overlooking Pemberton Meadows Road in the east, as well as up on the central park lookout on that weathered rock outcrop. In addition to the natural parks and tying into the existing trails, whether that be Banjo and Chaos or Shots Fired, as well as Big Tug and Big Tug Access, there's an opportunity to build new park amenities, as I mentioned, both within the neighborhood parks, including pump tracks and climbing walls and covered pavilions, as well as more naturalized parks. Next slide. The idea of the parks is still in process. And one of the overriding directives is to ensure that the Lillooet planning principles will inform not only the plan, but also the parks plan. And there's a desire now to work with the community and work with the different trail groups to ensure the integration of existing trails with the Nkwúkwma neighborhood vision. To ensure that we provide not only community destination, but also continue to provide access to the backcountry. Next slide. The phasing of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood is really divided between 2 basic phases over the next 10 to 15-year build out. Phase 1 of 128 homes really features a series of ground-oriented homes distributed across phases A, B, and C. And then phase 2, outlined in light blue, which features the townhomes and apartments, as well as a few ridge top single families in section C. Next slide. In support of the Nkwúkwma development application are a series then of reports on civil engineering as well as transportation. The civil engineering report undertaken by InterCAD civil engineers. And they were also the ones who worked with us back in 2007 on the original NCP plan. So they're well familiar with the village of Pemberton as well as the site's current constraints. The current 2021 report considers the development application for, as mentioned, the 267 homes across those two phases of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood. And it outlines the servicing requirements for the streets, water distribution, sanitary sewers, as well as stormwater drainage. As mentioned already, the proposed streets use hillside street standards that provide an opportunity to lower the design speed with a narrower platform that has less impact on the environment, but make sure that the maximum public road grade is 12% or less. And that as part of the extension of Eagle Ridge Drive, there'll be ultimately a collector loop through the upper lands linking back onto itself to provide multiple ways in and out of the full build out of the benchlands. Next slide. In terms of water, the two existing reservoirs that are currently within the Nkwúkwma neighborhood lands provide water to Benchlands Phase 1. Therefore, there'll be a requirement for a new reservoir to service the Nkwúkwma neighborhood. And in the interim, before that full reservoir is accessed and built, there'll be an interim water distribution plan, complete with balancing tanks and emergency generators to provide multi-stage pumping. In addition to that planning, our ongoing work with the village also includes contributing to the costs of modeling for the water infrastructure, both on-site as well as off-site improvements. In terms of sanitary sewer, because of the hillside terrain, there's an opportunity to use a gravity system, therefore minimizing and removing the need for pump stations. Within Eagle Ridge Drive extension, there'll be a main trunk line that will service all of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood. And as with water, the applicant is also contributing costs to the village to complete a study for the sanitary sewer infrastructure, including modeling of current and future needs, both on-site as well as off-site improvements, including upgrades to the sanitary treatment plant. In terms of the stormwater management plan, there'll be an integrated stormwater management plan undertaken, which applies a science-based understanding of how the natural watershed functions today and how this function needs to be replicated in the design of the storm system going forward to accommodate the Nkwúkwma neighborhood. There's a series of conceptual stormwater drainage plans that have been provided that considers the anticipated post-development drainage patterns, as well as identifies the preferred locations for detention within the benchlands. The drainage system currently comprises 2 catchment areas, and all of those lands will drain within detention ponds. The detention, in addition to that pond within Stolly Park, there'll be a second pond in the upper phase of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood. And there certainly is ongoing awareness of the current stormwater challenges at Dogwood and Elmwood. And like water and sanitary, the applicant is also contributing money with the village to complete the study for the stormwater infrastructure and associated computer modeling to identify both on-site as well as off-site infrastructure improvements. And finally, on the servicing, the Nkwúkwma neighborhood will contribute to ongoing improvements and levees of the Pemberton Valley Diking District, specifically looking at the Arn Canal as well as Pemberton Creek. Next slide. Traffic. The approach to traffic that is reflected in the Nkwúkwma development application is for the 267 units developed in 2 phases. The terms of reference that have been used to evaluate those traffic impacts are the terms of reference based on the BC Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure, as well as with inputs from the village, who have approved the scope and the approach. The report is part of the submission and is available for review. And it reviewed all current as well as future development proposed until the development date 2027, 2030. The status of the report is that of draft. The work has been submitted and is in process being reviewed with the village today. The initial findings of the report of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood indicate that there is capacity to accommodate traffic growth within the existing street network. And in fact, the number of trips generated by the neighborhood are forecast to amount to approximately 10% of the total traffic volume, for instance, on the intersection of Highway 99 and Portage Road. Of course, traffic is an important issue and one that the development application takes seriously. And so there will be ongoing and continuing discussion with the village in terms of how best to mitigate future impacts within the community. Next slide. In summary, the updated land use plan presented here is an opportunity for a more integrated, managed, and complete neighborhood within the village of Pemberton. And in fact, when we begin to look at all of the public designated lands, from natural parks and areas to neighborhood parks, utilities and public roads, it totals 60% of the neighborhood lands are for public dedication, with the remaining 40% dedicated to that variety of homes to provide a home for everyone within the Benchlands. Next slide. At this point, there's an opportunity to take those understandings and those plans and drape them, as we did at the first open house, onto the 3D model. The 3D model is highly accurate, based on 1 meter LiDAR contours, and is able to then give us an understanding of how these shapes and forms and relationships may function on the land itself. So let's now move into the video. We'll start with the summary constraints. And those odd shapes and polygons begin again to make more sense as we see them in three-dimensional. What's showing as forest are those lands that are less than 30% outside of constraints, whether that be riparian areas or the orange contaminated lands in the historic gun and rifle range, or those steep slopes that are coated in brown, or the darker gray of those rockfall hazards areas, as well as the bright orange of the archaeological areas of concern, and the light green, those areas of potential sharp-tailed snake habitat. As well, you can see the two existing Village of Pemberton reservoirs in white, as well as in blue marker, the two current telecommunication towers up on the northwest of the property. You can also see then how high the lands sit above the surrounding floodplain and how they sit outside of those ALR designated lands. The view now begins to also bring into scale Pemberton Meadows Road, the phase 1 of the Benchlands, as we transition then into that potential green framework, looking at development potential. The most constrained or highest constrained lands represented as green, the lowest constrained lands represented as yellow. Interestingly enough, the historic sites of the gun and rifle ranges are highly gentle. In fact, quite surprisingly, as you can note then by the presence of those large cream-colored areas. The hatching, of course, represents that moderate area of constraint, whether that be contamination that will be cleaned up, or areas of moderate slopes. We can also see then in the lower portion of the screen, the Nkwúkwma neighborhood, the subject of the development application for OCP amendment zoning, and also its distribution of generally 50% development highly constrained, 50% non-development. As we transition from that development potential into the illustrative concept, we see again an opportunity to extend Eagle Ridge Drive up the hill, and in doing so provide a series of home types represented by the different colors of buildings, as well as a looping lower local street, the center point of which is the neighborhood park, opportunity for pavilions and pump track and climbing wall, as well as gathering lawns. The central terrace, opportunity for townhomes as well as the apartment with big views, eastern views out over the valley, before transitioning up into the upper loop at the top of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood, with opportunities for small and medium homes that look north over Pemberton Meadows Valley. Beautiful views of the surrounding neighborhood. And one of the features I think that's particularly interesting about the Benchlands is its proximity for excellent light and sun exposure. We also, given the LiDAR technology that we have access to the existing tree canopy. And so what we've done here is place the illustrative concept within the existing tree canopy and heights and densities as they occur on the site, to begin to have a more finished experience of what the neighborhood will feel like at build out. And as we pass over Pemberton Creek and into the Nkwúkwma lands, we can see that central position of the neighborhood park and the big views out over the valley, as well as those three distinct terraces, low, medium, and upper, that spread from east towards west of the property, and that high point of the rocky knoll before transitioning to those steep northern slopes that move down towards the ALR and floodplain. We also see the relationship between the Nkwúkwma neighborhood and the adjacent Benchlands Phase 1, and how they sit both adjacent to and proximate within walking to the village of Pemberton itself. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Teo Finseth, the moderator, who will move forward with the opportunity for public engagement after giving us an update on the path forward.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn and Paul. Just to quickly touch on next steps, and this shows kind of the near-term timeline on your screen. Specifically, right at the left of the screen, you'll see that we're nearing the end of 2021, December 8th today, hosting public open house number 2. Now looking ahead to 2022, there will be a presentation to Village of Pemberton Council and Committee of the Whole early in the new year, followed by a Lillooet Nation open house, then a second presentation to Council, then followed by the bylaw process through the kind of middle portion of 2022, moving through first reading, public hearing, and third reading. With the idea that construction would or could begin in 2023. Next slide. Great. So now is the time where we are going to open it up to questions. So I'll have all the panelists kind of turn on their cameras so everybody can see you. And I'm going to move through the Q&A box and begin to answer questions and direct those questions to the relevant technical expert. So you can ask questions in one of two ways. You can raise your hand to speak live on the screen by clicking the raise hand function, and that'll allow you to speak directly to the group. Another way is to type your question into the Q&A box. A few questions have been put into the chat, which we'll get to, but it would be helpful if you can direct those into the Q&A, and we'll make our way through this list of questions. So the first one starts with Jamie, and I think the question would be good for Paul to answer, but the question is, what is the ratio of community parks in the development to homes? Does the planned community space ratio align with the potential population numbers for the neighborhood if the houses were to be zoned multifamily dwellings? So I think the question there is really around the ratio between community parks and development lands.
Jamie, thanks for your question. I think without knowing the specific metrics, that's an interesting metric to use. The Nkwúkwma development application provides ample parks, both through the protection and preservation of new community nature parks, as outlined within the illustrative plan with the darkest green, as well as active neighborhood parks used for social gathering and active play outside of those natural areas. And when we look at the numbers within the land use plan, we see that parks, both the natural area parks, the natural protected areas, generally focused on riparian areas, as well as neighborhood parks, tally almost 50% of the site. So is there a good ratio? Absolutely. And that's been a guiding direction from the start.
And if I could just add, Jamie, is with subdivision, 5% is typically dedicated as parkland in any subdivision. And I'd also say that the focus has been on what the community gave us as comments as far as trail use and active, nature, getting out in nature rather than sort of the standard parkette or playing field. So that's also driven the direction of the parks plan that is still yet to be developed.
Great. Thank you for the answers there. The next one is a question from Davis. And it's a comment, but also I think a question, and definitely I think we'd like to recognize this one is that as far as he knows, there is no Eagle Ridge Drive. It's called Eagle Drive. And he's noting that it is frustrating that it's used interchangeably, and it's contributed to a lot of confusion as it shows up incorrectly on a lot of mapping information. So I'm not sure, maybe Carrie as kind of a local voice could speak to that one, but I think that's really a bit of a mapping issue and a bit of a base mapping issue.
I can speak to this. Yeah, it would, whatever, Davis, it would be the base map that I believe Acoustics built off of, would have named it Eagle Ridge Drive, but they seem to be used interchangeably. Certainly we can speak to the village of Pemberton about that, because I too went back and forth and I was never quite sure if it was Eagle or Eagle Ridge.
Yeah.
And in fact, on Google Maps right now, it says Eagle Ridge Drive. So pardon us for our incorrect and somewhat confusing reference to both Eagle Ridge Drive and Eagle Drive. I hope everyone knows that we're talking about the same street, and we will, as Carolyn said, seek clarification and be consistent in our terminology there.
Great. I see Jamie has a few questions here, and I'm just going to skip ahead so we can kind of get through all of these. I will jump back once we're able to kind of get through all these questions. The next one is from Lee Ann. Kind of a comment here, and I think this might be a good one for Adrian. Question on the environmental side. From the maps, the topography, the terrace areas, it seems like some of those areas are identified as wetlands. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're referring to the area that's across the Pemberton Meadows Road, but on the proposed development of the benchland, we didn't identify any wetlands, no.
Mm-hmm.
There's some streams, there's a pond, but no wetlands.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this mapping, I think, shows kind of the base mapping that was gathered on site by Cascade. And as Adrian just highlighted, a number of drainage networks but no wetlands mapped.
And I think maybe to be helpful, part of the challenge on the site is that it has a series of old roads, generally built originally in logging and then added to with the development of both the gun and rifle range and the utility corridors. And as such, those then are opportunities for collecting and directing drainage. And over the years, that drainage, seasonal drainage, has then become more and more incised, and that represents the largest and straightest running kind of north-south drainage as represented on the plan on the screen. And as Adrian noted, that stream is disconnected from that small circular wetted area, which is kind of a receiving area of the surrounding steeper slopes. The plan recognizes all of the features, including the riparian features, and provides opportunities for setback as well as culverting to make sure that we're not damaging that habitat as exists on the site today.
Great. Thanks for the answers, Adrian and Paul. Next up, we do have a few questions from an anonymous attendee, and I'll try to get through the 3 questions here. The first, probably for Adrian again, the idea that has there been critical habitat identified for species at risk? Has a western screech owl nest been identified within the site? I think we touched on that on the presentation, but maybe you can just kind of touch on that again.
Yeah, so there's a few species at risk that have the potential to occur on site. I'll find the list here in a moment.
Slide 27.
Yeah, slide 27.
Yeah, there it is on the screen.
Okay.
So the question again is that has there been critical habitat identified for species at risk? And then the kind of second part to that is, has a western screech owl nest been identified on the site?
So we still basically there's potential for sharp-tailed snake habitat, but having habitat that fits all the criteria for the sharp-tailed snake doesn't necessarily mean the sharp-tailed snake will be present. That's where we're going to be conducting presence absence survey to kind of try to determine whether the sharp-tailed snake is present or not. The screech owl has also the potential to be present on site. So we'll conduct some nest survey prior to clearing.
Great, thanks, Adrian. Second part to that is, has a stormwater management plan been approved by the Village of Pemberton? I think that would maybe be a good question for Don Young of Intercad, our civil engineer.
Thanks, Teo. I don't believe anything has been approved by the Village of Pemberton. To date, we have produced master plans for servicing, including stormwater, which are based on the current development plan, but they're founded on that 2005 neighborhood plan that was adopted into the OCP. The plan currently drains into detention ponds. We've expressed that to the city before. They're to the village before, and they're very aware of what the plan is. But no, it has not been approved. At this time, we're working with the city and their consultant to work on modeling of the stormwater system, the existing stormwater system, trying to identify areas where infrastructure will need improvement. And that's sort of where we stand right now with stormwater.
Yeah, great. So it's a work in progress, and it's developing along with this application. Thanks, Don. And then I think the third one, what are the specific benefits that will be provided to the community of Pemberton? It's a fairly broad question. I think maybe the presentation was able to elaborate on some of those items. Might be one that Carolyn could comment on, but it's probably one that is a little bit of a long answer, but maybe you could comment on that, or Paul.
Well, maybe I'll start and then Carolyn can finish. I think the direct benefits of the Nkwúkwma neighborhood is an opportunity to have a new form of neighborhood plan that provides comprehensive understanding, providing a variety of housing within hillside street standards and municipal services, including streets, water, sanitary, and stormwater, as well as utilities, that contributes to the development and management and support of the village municipal systems. So unlike much of the development that happens in small communities, where there are private septic and water systems, this is an opportunity to do comprehensive planning in close proximity to the village and have that development leveraged to contribute towards new facilities as well as needed upgrades within the village itself. Okay, Carolyn, what would you add in addition to that?
Well, I think I'd add the first few slides that both Maxine and Carrie talked about, which was the importance of the Lil'wat traditional territory and recognition of that, as well as economic development, not just for the Lil'wat, but for the community wide. These are lots that small builders will be able to build on. People will be able to build their own homes. I also think that we hadn't talked about it too much, but the contaminated site, that's not a small cleanup. That is a $3 to $4 million cleanup. And I just think that's important for the community to know that the province was not planning to clean up in the near term. We have to do it pretty much. It's going to be pretty hard to sell lots without a mitigation plan or a remediation plan. The other is to work with what we did here is the importance of this site as far as securing it for trails and just the natural area. So that's really important as well. And then as Paul mentioned, the village, we are also working with the village to do a significant study, modeling study for the upgrades of water and sanitary, which has been not kept up to date for the village over the last 7 years. The other is the most important this week is the stormwater management study, which really the phase 1, really, as many of you know that live near it, that stormwater detention pond at Staley Park is not working. There's some sort of pump that pumps it out, and that just needs to be cleaned up as well. So those are a few of the things. And then of course, the bigger one is the opportunity for community amenities through your contribution policy. And a project like this is something that could fund something, a larger project in the long term, because it would last for so long. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Paul and Carolyn. There was a few questions in the chat as well. So I just ask everybody to funnel their questions to the Q&A, because that's what will be monitored. But I have pulled out a couple of those questions. The first one is a question from Will. And the question is, that seems like a lot of homes and people with only a single exit/entry. Are there other neighborhoods in the area with this number of potential houses without a second emergency exit? I think this is probably a question either on the civil side or even a traffic question for Donna. Are one of you prepared to answer that question, Donna?
Well, hello, it's Donna Howes. Thanks for, I appreciate being here tonight. So I'll try and answer the question. I'll ask Don to add into it. We're working with the village on the access and the points and getting things approved right now. But yes, I think there are other communities in British Columbia that have similar setups like this. We've been working with just how things would connect and possible opportunities for additional accesses in the future. But it really is a work in progress right now. So maybe Don, if you could add to that.
I guess it's always been a desire to have an alternate access into the site. In reviewing the topography, we have found it extremely challenging to find anything but the extension of Eagle Drive as an alternate access or a second access. What the plan does contemplate is in the future, when they move into Area 3 after the remediation of the contaminated area, they will be looping the collector road back on itself. So that will provide alternate access into the upper reaches of the development, but the initial stages will simply be hung on Eagle Drive, one access.
Great, thanks. Now, a few more questions here. And I'm just going to move through, and if I've seen questions from the same person, I am going to try to get questions from multiple folks. So the next one here is from Annie Oja. How will the proposed sidewalks and pathways on the Eagle Ridge extension tie into town? The sidewalk currently ends at Staley Park. So that's kind of an offsite question around, well, how do these sidewalks connect from this project down into the village? Maybe Carolyn can comment on that, but I think it's probably one that needs to be further worked through with the village.
Yeah, I think I think Paul's presentation went through quite a bit about how within the development, the sidewalks and trails will be separated from the road. I think what we'd really like to do is work with the neighbors in that area to see what is on their mind and what would work best for them. The original Benchlands Phase 1 actually had the sidewalk come up to Staley Park, and then there was actually a trail to nowhere that the previous developer will remember that kind of is a lookout, but it wasn't quite as fundamental. So the intent was to go through Staley Park and then into the other development sites so that you would go off road. I know in the winter and at night, that's not a great idea. And I believe it's probably not possible right now because of the detention pond is just overflowing. So those are things that we would love after probably early in the new year to meet with people and to talk more about what the opportunities might be.
Great, fantastic. So just working my way through the questions here. And I see a number of questions here. One on trails from Leanne. It says banjo, shots fired, and chaos were mentioned to be protected, but curious about the most popular trail being Fat Tug and what's its status. So I think if we go to the Parks and Trails plan, and
I'm happy to talk to that.
Yeah, perfect.
Oh, I just got my whole screen up here. Okay, so the Fat Tug, once it leaves the Crown land, the purchase land, it actually is a Section 57 trail, and Carrie probably could speak to this too. It is secured. So if in the future parties would like to log it or whatever, and I think that's Lilwat's tenure, the community forest tenure, they would have to preserve the trail. The trail over the years has come down parallel to Pemberton, and I think for the most part, it is within that area. I just want to clarify that as much as we want to retain the trails, we actually want to work with local trails organizations to talk about what is important for them to keep. We did hear a lot in the first open house about there's a really important learning area up in the area, and that some of the learning and their children's learning trails should be expanded. We've also heard that it's not just mountain biking up there. There's a lot of people that walk their dogs. And then of course, the third layer is the archaeological sites to make sure that that they're protected in the way that the Lilwat chooses, as well as the archaeological requirements of the province. So those are some of the things. I don't know if that answered all your question, but Fat Tug off, like when you get into that trailhead just at the top of the horrible road, That's not part of our site. But when you come down through those flowy trails, for the most part, I think they're within the riparian area. But again, this is a work in progress.
Great. Yeah. No, it's helpful to see the trails kind of mapped in relation to this project, and interesting to know their relationship with the crown lands above.
Yeah.
So just working my way through here. Another question from Jamie around sidewalks. A couple sidewalk questions around, are there sidewalks planned for all the streets in the neighborhood? And that Pemberton Plateau doesn't have them, and that it would be really great to have those. And another question related to that around, are the sidewalks only on one side of the street? So I think maybe Paul, you can answer that question.
So you're absolutely right, Jamie. There are many streets in Pemberton and other small towns that don't have sidewalks, and people find a way of working with that. Within the Nkwúkwma neighborhood, the desire is to have more intentional streets that accommodate not only cars, but also people and bicycles. So in the local street, those two loops that only have residential homes on them, so it's not for getting from one place to the other, it's really just accessing your homes. The intention is to have a dedicated sidewalk removed from the back of curb that provides for safe pedestrian usage. And then in a local situation, cars and bikes generally share the street, given the very slow nature of cars in a local street. As we go to the previous slide, we look at the collector, then that 1.5 meter wide sidewalk is expanded to 2.5 meters or 8 feet, and it becomes a shared, separated place for both pedestrians and cyclists to move, not only in the summertime, but also in the fall and in even winter conditions, separating them from the road. And then you can see the road has both opportunities for 2 lanes of traffic, as well as additional pavement for opportunities for designated parking. So yes, within the Nkwúkwma neighborhood, all of the streets, both collector and local public streets, will have public sidewalks. In the case of the strata townhomes, where you don't have a cross section for that, but the intention is that the lanes will be on one side of the strata, and then you'll have pedestrian mews or walkways that feed their front doors on the opposite side of the building, beginning to separate and dedicate vehicle areas and pedestrian areas.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Paul. So a few more questions here, and a long list of questions. I'm glad everybody is able to do that. One, I think kind of a two-parter. These are both kind of related to servicing. So Dawn, the first being, what is the timeline for the sewer study, and some concern that it's not useful if it's after the development. So you can answer that one. And then secondly, where are the new water towers going to be placed? They only see the existing towers. So kind of two questions there.
Thanks, Dale. Yeah, we fully agree that the study needs to be done before anything is constructed. It would be rather useless to get it after the fact, but we've been working with the municipality, with the village of Pemberton and their consultant, to try to get to the point where they can get the existing systems modeled and incorporate into the existing model the proposed loads that are coming off of the benchlands. This is fundamental so that we can identify any downstream deficiencies in the system, and the municipality can work towards correcting that. What was the second part of that question?
Yeah, so the second question was around the new water towers. So maybe you can touch on kind of the interim plan to service water for this application, and then the future lands.
Correct. Yeah. So the location for the reservoir, the ultimate reservoir to service the current plan is off the top of the Collector Road in the northwest corner of the site. The plan is to construct a new reservoir there and pumping facilities to pump into the upper zone, zone 3. Initially, in phase 1, there will be a pump and a balancing tank along with an emergency generator constructed adjacent to the existing reservoirs. And that pump system will provide service to phase 1 of the development.
Great.
I think that's it.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Don. So just going to mention here, we are up past 8 o'clock now, but the presentation did run kind of almost an hour. So we are going to continue to answer these questions and move through the list of questions. Please stay on the line if you can and stay with us. We're going to try to continue to answer questions up until 8:30. So we'll continue to move through those. Another question from an anonymous attendee here, thanking for the informative presentation. There's a question around how the town of Pemberton is planning to serve the additional 1,000 residents in terms of medical services. And this is maybe a question directed at Pemberton Council, but what are your plans to address and continue to serve the needs of the increased population base? Thank you for the opportunity. So I think that's really a question around the services within the village and how they can be kind of enhanced to serve, obviously what is a growing population. Perhaps Carrie could answer that question, or
okay. Hey, Theo, I think I could answer it just to talk about how projects like this are dealt with senior government. And I think there's also questions probably about schools, and there'd be a question about for example, the Diking District and also the clinic. What happens when we submit a rezoning? It gets referred to all these external agencies for their comments. So each of those organizations would have a plan over, a 5-year or 10-year plan for their facilities and services. So this application would have been sent. There was a report, and I think we link it on our website, that staff did letting council know that this referral process has commenced. We did receive comments back from a few, most notably the Diking District, and we've met with them first just to sort of understand their position and concerns. We haven't yet heard from the school board, other than to say that the site wasn't needed, as well as some of the other provincial ministries like MOTI. So I would say stay tuned. Certainly all of those issues would be raised by village staff as they bring forward the actual bylaws, if that's appropriate to council. So probably early in the new year, there'll be some responses.
Great. Thank you. We have a question from Jesse. Earlier in the presentation, Carolyn mentioned that a conclusion coming out of the open house survey was that the community felt adequate commercial space was accommodated in the village of Pemberton, but that considering the economic shift through COVID-19 and the pandemic over the last couple of years, that there may be, and feeling like there may be a need to reevaluate that. Because of the increase in virtual meeting culture, new businesses have been able to form in the community. And as a new business owner, finding a commercial space has been a challenge. There are a few options for both small businesses looking for professional offices as well as growing businesses. But at a minimum, there may be a desire here for some commercial zoning. For potentially a daycare, which is underserved, and that this would be a valuable addition. So I think that's a bit of a comment around that. Yeah, commercial may be there is a demand for that. Maybe we can comment on that from a planning perspective. And I think Carolyn, maybe you're tied into that as well in terms of your understanding, but I think it's a great comment and something we'll definitely note down here as we move forward through this process.
Really quick, a lot has changed since, you know, in the last year, right, 2 years. I do know that in discussing with the village that most of downtown will be and is being considered for redevelopment. I know of 3 sites that are looking for redevelopment to enhance and increase. The reason why we are not too keen on putting a lot of commercial that would draw people from outside is traffic. I think we more look at flexible residential spaces where people can work at home, similar to what we've seen over the last 2 years. So that is sort of a driving factor, but something to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comment insofar as just the shift with the pandemic and how that has affected the way people work and the type of businesses that they need in their community. So great comment. Now, question from Allison around there's that there is no stormwater pond in Staley Park and that it's seasonally flooded with a drainage ditch. So are there plans to dig out that and build a pond? I think that's really a reflection of, well, it's not a functioning stormwater pond at this point. And maybe Dawn and Carolyn, I know you're well aware of this. So maybe some comments on that. Sorry, Dawn, I'm just going to have to unmute.
Staley Park currently is considered a detention pond. The way that pond works is it probably seldom sees water. It's only during a rainfall event that it would, a significant rainfall event, that it would see water. I think it's the city or the village has agreed with us that it doesn't seem to be working as intended. So there's probably some effort required to make that facility work in the way that it was intended. There's also some downstream storm sewer infrastructure issues there that the city or the village is looking into. Again, we're working with them on their modeling, and they're going to identify issues in their existing infrastructure that need to be corrected. We're just not certain when that study is going to be complete or when they're going to be able to provide answers to any of those questions.
Great. Yeah, so I think like kind of a continued theme with the stormwater and sanitary, whereby continued studies are kind of emerging, and that the modeling is really key to beginning to understand those, and that definitely an improvement there in that stormwater pond is needed. I think a second question here, and it might be helpful for us to just go to the environmental plan for this one. And it does relate to the stormwater question, and it's kind of a two-parter from Allison. And just the park and stormwater in the park there is kind of cut off, but that there was an ephemeral stream that appeared in a 2000 map that Allison has seen that was kind of at where Eagle Drive currently ends and then drains down into the stormwater pond. And that it no longer appears on our development mapping and our current environmental mapping. So maybe a comment there from Adrian around just the environmental mapping that was done there. Doesn't look like that was identified on the plans.
Yeah, that old drainage was there on some older maps, but when we did the field assessment to look at all the streams that were present on the property, we didn't find anything in that location. It was just like the site has been highly modified, so it could very well be that that water that used to drain through there now drains through another ditch that was created on the site.
Right.
Yeah,
And
notably the new water reservoir was added, and as we all know, the road sort of switched a little bit there. So I think that's an important consideration. That happened around 2012, 13.
Right. Okay. And I think it very much kind of relates to the question of, well, how is water then drained down into the stormwater pond? So I think they're very much related, and something that we're very aware of and are continuing to kind of study and understand.
I think though, to Allison's comment, we would definitely will look at that. I know Davis added a similar comment, and it's probably a good time of year to whip up there and just make sure.
Now, a question from Nick, that the traffic study, he's having a hard time finding it on the Village of Pemberton website, but that when he looked at it, the study had been conducted in September of 21 during the pandemic. That has impacted visitor numbers during the quieter times of the year, so that it doesn't appear to be representative of the traffic during peak season in the summer. The pinch point at the railway crossing is also a concern for him. So maybe Donna, our traffic engineer, can comment on that one.
Sure. So regarding the study, it's still under review with the village, and it was probably prematurely posted. There's quite a bit of back and forth between ourselves and the village that needs to take place. And we as yet haven't had any comments back from the village at this point. But the counts were done prior to the pandemic in September 2019. We also reference other data in the area. We do realize with the pandemic, there's likely going to be some changes in how traffic will move. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as well. But it was definitely done there. Regarding the railway track, once again, that's infrastructure within the village. We have noted that in our report, and I think there'll be more information about that in the future. And that's a bigger issue than just this developments, but for sure it will be on the table for discussion. Thanks.
Mark has a question. Is there a trail access planned along the southern boundary of the development lands? This would allow access to the Pemberton Creek waterfall. And that he didn't note the waterfall trail on our neighborhood concept plan, because I think it is off of our property, but maybe Carolyn and Paul, we could comment on that.
I'll be really
The
quick.
access, if we go to the trail plan, Barry, and we zoom into that southern edge, we see that the extension of Eagle Drive up the hill requires us to move to the south and cross over the current alignment of Fat Tug, as well as the Pemberton Waterfall trail access, in order to maintain that public maximum road grade of 10 to 12% on the way up. So what that means is both Fat Tug as well as that current trail will need to have some realignment and some accommodation done within the neighborhood. But the intent, of course, is to continue to provide as much of the existing Fat Tug and Pemberton Waterfall Trail as we can, while still accommodating the extension of Eagle Drive and some of the associated homes along the edge of it.
Mm-hmm.
So while the route will change in its current form, the intent is to provide future access to both those features, Fat Truck Trail, as well as the Pemberton Waterfall. What would you add to that, Carolyn, given your familiarity with the site?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It's as we all know, that trail is could be improved. There's sections of it, they're pretty sketchy, but that is something that the community has raised as a potential community amenity contribution or improvement. But I think what Paul said was correct.
Great, thank you. There's a question from Barbara, just a comment saying that there's a key problem with traffic entering and then exiting the development. And I think continuing to identify that the train crossing to get there is a real barrier. I think Donna commented there that she has identified that in her report. So I think that'll continue to be studied and that her report is still in draft form. Anything you'd like to add to that, Donna, or? You're just on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I think regarding the rail crossing, it is, I mentioned it's a bigger issue than just this development. It is something that the village will have to speak to as well. So that's important to note. So we have identified it as a pinch point, but it's something that's going to be part of a larger conversation with all other development that's going on in this area as well.
Great. And I think one here, and Dawn's touched on this, and Donna, maybe you can comment as well. And I think it's been a focus for our whole team is around this single access to the site. I've seen probably 5 or 6 comments on this, which is great. And one noting that we did have a looping condition in the previous 2007 planning that went out all the way around the backside through the regional district and out to the Pemberton Meadows Road. So that was a second access that was identified previously. And then that, comments around potential emergency exiting kind of concerns. And I think, Donna, you mentioned that there are other communities in the province that do have similar scenarios to this. So maybe we can touch on a couple of those things. And maybe just starting with the connection to Pemberton Meadows Road and how that has continued, and we've kind of looked at that.
Well, I suppose one of the biggest challenges with that particular connection is the geometry, and maybe I'll just ask Don to sort of step in there and just look at some of the challenges of actually building that road as well as land ownership. So, Don, could you step in there?
Yeah, the geometry on most of the roadways proposed for this development is pushing the upper limit. Very, very tight horizontal curves, very steep grades. In fact, we were proposing a 30-kilometer per hour design speed. This is pretty mountainous terrain. Even though from a development point of view, it seems that there's areas to build homes on. From a road point of view, it's tough to access. The roads that were shown in the 2007 plan, sneaking out on the north side of the development, currently there's no opportunity to get out that way. I believe that land is not controlled by the Lillooet Nation or the developer. They're privately held, and so I don't think we can go there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I just see a note here from Carrie that locally there is the Cheakamus crossing, which has a 1-in, 1-out, as well as Rainbow on the north side, which are kind of single entry neighborhoods with kind of similar makeup of kind of neighborhood pattern.
And I could also note that within the looping, the larger loop, we are looking at 267 units. That additional road that went over to what's called phase 2 and then up through the SLRD parcel was for over 500 units. Right now, we don't know if that site can be remediated, and that's why we're at 267 units. So that's what's being proposed. The grades, we really did try to see if a road could go in there to have that looping road. But I think the reality is that it would add probably 5 minutes to those people's driving time. So I think what our real focus has been is on walkable communities. And then even within the development, if there was, say, a house fire along one of the streets, there's loops in other parts, little, the other developments, you could go route through a strata or you could route through a loop road. So those have all been worked through as well as the Valley Trail.
Mhm. Great, yeah, thank you. We have kind of a comment and then some questions from Jim. First off, that he is against this development, and that that the residents of Benchlands, they are concerned, or that how do the residents of Benchlands feel about the excessive added traffic through the neighborhood, and that he's concerned about that. What will be done about the added strain to traffic, it sounds like, but also to the medical facilities. And then a kind of another question around water runoff. So maybe we'll start with around the traffic impacts. I think Dawn has commented on that, and you can just comment on potentially the local traffic impacts to the local neighborhood. And then maybe Carolyn, you can comment on, again, just highlighting your comment on the kind of medical center and the updates there.
Well, maybe I'll just start off, and Caroline, you can add to this, but that first phase of Benchland was always developed as being the first phase, and knowing that we're going to be other connections further upstream of where that development had occurred. So I think, the road was always intended to connect to something else. And although, 267 sounds like a lot of houses, really, people don't travel all at the same time of day, so traffic is spread out over the day. So overall, it's not going to be a huge amount of traffic on that road. It's actually going to be quite low. So obviously it's going to be more than there is now, because it ends up it's a dead end. So for sure there will be a change, but it's not going to be unmanageable.
Great.
I don't know if Caroline, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I think we've heard from the community there is a concern about construction traffic, which I think is as well. And I think that's something we, again, would like to think about a bit more, because it's a large project, multi-phase. There's a lot we could do on site to minimize that. But on the flip side, it is an economic development. So we don't want to restrict it to one developer. Or one builder. We want it spread around. I think I already answered the medical center question.
Yeah.
So.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to try to get some questions in here from folks who haven't had a chance to answer or ask questions. We have about 5 minutes left or so, and just going to try to sift through here regarding or seeing some names that I haven't answered questions for. I think a question from Kirsten around, why was the original traffic study done for the Benchlands not used and followed? That the original traffic impact study called for another entrance before the next phase moved forward, and also why is it that we're doing this traffic assessment for the 267 units and not for all of the future residential development as part of future phases? So I think kind of a comment on the kind of original traffic work that was done, and then a second part around the units.
I've actually asked Caroline if she could speak to this initially, and then I'll add on to that.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, the question is why the 267 units?
Yeah, I think that,
we went back and forth on that, but the reality is we submitted a rezoning application. And the application right now is for 267 units for real reasons. That contaminated site and just the remediation of it and the expense and whether it can be done, and not just be done so it's safe for the community to walk through and play in. It has to be to a standard for residential development, which is quite a bit higher. The other is, so there's that question, and then obviously the parcel it's not part of the rezoning application. So the village can make that comment when they review it, when they review the report, if they want us to go more, but right now the application is just for 267 units. And I think we've been quite upfront that those lands exist and that they could be developed in the future subject to those two requirements.
Great.
And maybe just adding on to that, we did review and look at that. It's a 2005 traffic study. We looked at it as far as what the assumptions were and made sure that there was some continuity. Regarding the question about why, you know, the additional, why there wasn't another access, ask for another entrance. I think that's something that the village has to respond to on that process since 2005. So I think it's going to be part of the discussions moving forward for sure.
Great. Thanks, Donna. Have a question here from Tim, just trying to kind of work my way through the list and try to get to people who I haven't spoken to or haven't read a question from yet. That are there any amenities, commercial spaces, grocery stores, medical centers, daycares proposed for the site? And that, I think this is a comment that's been shared and I've seen it a few times, that you know, those are amenities that are really desirable and that they are kind of strained currently. So I think a question around how we manage that, and I think it's definitely something that we're going to take into consideration on this application, these comments around maybe some multi-use spaces. Any comments, Carolyn, Paul, around those sorts of uses? It's really more a comment than a question. The next one is around light pollution, and that you know, any bylaws that could be applied around light pollution, excessive exterior lighting, as well as street lighting. So maybe Paul, you could speak to that.
Well, in terms of bylaw changes, that's something that would be great for the village to institute. Of course, it has knock-on effects in terms of existing lighting and needing to change out heads that have cutoff or directional lighting down on the ground to try and limit that, as well as switching from incandescent and sodium halide into a more LED format for power reduction. So will there be bylaw changes? Well, that's something certainly to talk to your councillors and your staff around. The opportunity here within the Nkwúkwma neighborhood is that given that it's new infrastructure going in, there's an opportunity to kind of do it right from the beginning. And that would include LED street standards as well, that would be focused in their fixture design to limit light pollution on the hillside.
Great. We've now kind of reached the 8:30 mark. So I think, unfortunately, we couldn't get to all the questions tonight. We were able to answer, you know, just about 1/3 of them. Or about half of them. So what I would suggest is if there are questions that haven't been answered here, please get your questions in to the website. Maybe we can just go to the next slide. And it does detail kind of how you can provide feedback. So there will be an opportunity to provide additional feedback on what you heard tonight, and that will be available for about the next month or so, a little over a month, until January 10th. You can provide your feedback through both visiting the nkwúkwmapemberton.com website and completing the survey and comment form. Really helpful for you guys to provide the feedback on that, as well as emailing any questions to info@nkwúkwmapemberton.com. We always welcome questions and feedback, very important to us. So please, after December 8th, after tonight, please send us an email at info@nkwúkwma.com, nkwúkwmapemberton.com, or be in touch through our Stay Informed feature on the website.
Yeah, Tara, the one more thing I wanted to say is you may go on the website and you see the FAQ is still under construction. We will then take some of the questions, well, most of them, all of them that weren't answered, as well as others, and do an FAQ so that keep posted. It's probably to sift through them and to make sure we're not duplicating in probably about a week time. We hope to have an FAQ up to get those. But if you don't see it there, please do as Theo suggested.
Great. Great, thank you. And then I would like to pass it back to Maxine to close out this evening together. I'd like to thank everybody for your time. And now I'll pass it over to Maxine.
Thank you, Theo, and thank you everyone for participating in this virtual gathering. It's a new way that we have to approach each other's and to be able to have a conversation. I really enjoyed the presentation and thank you so much for all the questions you put forward. You know, this is a Liotwat Economic Development Project. It's very exciting for me. The Liotwat take the approach of we are the Uhual Miuk Temiuk, we are people of the land, which is we're very sensitive towards the land and the resources. You know, in order to name this project, we called upon our Liotwat Cultural Heritage Language Authority to guide us on the cultural and language aspects to this date. So I'm really proud to be able to share that with everyone. You know, and I like to really acknowledge you know, the technicians that we've been working with. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for all the work you've done to this point. It's very exciting for me. And thank you, Acoustics. You know, that I remember the first time I seen the 3D model and I was amazed. And, you know, just to think that our vision is moving forward is quite exciting. And, you know, and not to talk too much about the environmental, you know, that the Liotwat people are the Uhual Miuk Temiuk, people of the land. That is so important to us for the long haul. And, you know, the geotechnical and learning from technicians like Contour is amazing. And I'm really thankful that the Liotwat Nation has participated in the archaeological processes so far. And, you know, to learn more from the archaeological impact assessment, I look forward to that. And thank you to the engineers and, you know, the civil engineers, the traffic engineers. This is so amazing for me. As you all know, Liotwat is striving towards self-determination. You know, that this is an example that's going to, this Nkwúkwma project will contribute to the nation's building of an economic foundation. It's something that we've been looking at for a long time. And, you know, this project has been on the go, as you heard Carolyn say earlier, in the early 2000s. And here I am, 2021, and I'm involved in this. And, you know, just to see the Nkwúkwma logos as part of that's one of our archaeological sites. It makes me so proud. And just to look at the site itself, you know, and I made comments earlier that we're above the floodplain and the views are just fantastic. I remember taking a hike up there a few times and I just turn around and what a perspective. So I just want to share that with everyone. My gratitude for all of you being here, for the technicians and your expertise. I know we're in it for the long haul. On behalf of the Liotwat Nation, Kukshtumush Katlap, Nifti.
I think we're done. Teo?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Maxine. So that does conclude this evening. Thank you for participating, everybody. So we'll now be kind of ending the queue or the open house number 2. And we look forward to your questions and comments.